sexual reproduction. Right. So there are three phases in sexual reproduction. These three phases are known as the first phase is known as the juvenile phase. The second phase is known as the reproductive phase. And the third phase is known as the senescent phase. These are the three phases under sexual reproduction. So, what do you mean by the juvenile phase? Well, juvenile phase is the period of growth of the organism where it before it reaches a certain where they reach a certain amount of maturity. It's the period of its growth where it finally reaches a certain amount of maturity before it is actually capable of reproducing. So if you get to define juvenile phase, you will write it is the period of the growth of organism where it reaches a certain amount of maturity and it's before it is capable of reproducing. So, the juvenile phase is a period of growth of organism where it reaches a certain amount of maturity, and it's before it is capable of reproducing sexually. Okay, so in this very phase, the development of the organism takes place, the entire development, and this phase is marked with the end, or not the end but the starting of the reproductive phase. Okay. So in case of the reproductive phase, the organism becomes capable of reproducing sexually, and in case of plants, there are various seasons in which plants produce flowers. As you know that flowers are the sexual components or the sexual organs of the plant. So there are various seasons in which the flowers grow. So the period between the growth of flowers in a particular season and the growth of flowers in the other season, this period in between is known as the interflowering period. Do you know that the bamboo tree flowers only once in 150 years? You can write it for information that the bamboo tree flowers only once in 150 years, only once in its lifetime actually, in its lifetime, and produces fruits out of it and eventually dies. So in its entire lifetime, it only once produces flowers. Similar is the case in Strobilanthus kunthiana. Strobilanthus kunthiana. It is also commonly known as Neel Kuranji. It's known as Neel Kuranji because of its blue flowers. It's grown in Kerala. It grows in Kerala, mostly in the South Indian states, Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. And this plant also flowers once in 12 years. Flowers once in 12 years. Okay. So as we were talking about the reproductive phase, do you know the cycle, the cycle of the reproductive phase which is present in the primates? That cycle is known as the menstrual cycle, whereas in the case of non-primates, that cycle is known as the estrous cycle. So in primates, menstrual cycle is present. In primates include us, apes, humans, monkeys, okay? And in case of non-primates, estrous cycle is present. In non-primates, you have the rabbit or the cat, the dog. These come under the non-primates. So after primates and non-primates, the menstrual cycle and the estrous cycle, there are organisms that breed only in particular seasons, and such organisms are known as, this can be asked in your exams, what are seasonal breeders? So yeah, these organisms are known as seasonal breeders, whereas the organisms that have the ability to breed throughout the year are known as continuous breeders. Human can be put as an example in continuous breeders. Okay. In your exams, they can ask you what is the difference between seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. You just have to remember that because it's written seasonal, which means these breeders will only be able to breed in some particular seasons, whereas in case of continuous breeders, the breeders will be able to breed continuously throughout the year. So Seasonal breeders are the organisms that breed only in particular seasons, whereas organisms that have the ability to breed throughout the year are known as continuous breeders. Right. So, under sexual reproduction, we were studying about the reproductive phase. And finally, after the reproductive phase comes the senescent phase. In this very phase is basically deterioration of metabolism, or you can say slowing down of metabolism, which eventually leads to the death of the organism, right? These are three phases under sexual reproduction. The first phase is juvenile phase, the second phase is the reproductive phase, and finally comes the senescent phase, where eventually the organism passes away. Now there are a few events or the few processes that come under sexual reproduction. Okay, these events, there are three events which come under sexual reproduction. Okay, so the first event is known as the pre-fertilization event. Fertilization, and of course the post-fertilization events. First we're going to read about what are the events that come under pre-fertilization. The first event that comes under pre-fertilization is gametogenesis and gamete transfer. Okay. So in the process of gametogenesis, the organism produces gametes, right? So either the organism may be capable of producing both the gametes, or there will be a female organism that will produce a female gamete, or there will be a male organism that will produce a male gamete. So the organisms that are capable of producing both the gametes are known as hermaphrodite and the organisms these organisms which produce both the gametes. For animals, we have the example of the earthworm. Earthworm is hermaphrodite, whereas the organisms which are capable of producing only one type of the gamete are known as unisexual. And for that for animals we have the example of the cockroach. Cockroach is a unisexual organism. In case of plants, we call hermaphrodites as monoecious plants, and we call the unisexual plants as dioecious. Okay, so for plants we have the example of cucurbits under monoecious, Khara and coconut. And for unisexual or the dioecious plants we have papaya, markhantia and the date palm. Alright. So for monoecious plants we have cucurbits, Khara and coconut, and for the dioecious plants we have papaya, markhantia and the date palm. So there are various plants whose parents are themselves haploid. This is in the case of the bryophytes and the algae. But in the higher plants such as the gymnosperms, pteridophytes and angiosperms, this is not the case. The parent body is diploid. So from a parent body which is diploid, you have to produce a gamete which is haploid. So the parent mother cell will be known as the myocyte. This myocyte or the parent mother cell undergoes meiosis to produce haploid gamete. Right. So if the mother was 2n, the gamete produces n. We can have few examples like in humans. I'll just rub this off. In humans, chromosome number of myocyte and chromosome number of gamete. We can differentiate. So in humans, the chromosome number of myocyte is 46, whereas the chromosome number of gamete is 23. In case of dogs, 78 and 39. In case of cats, in case of Ophioglossum, that's a plant, right. So in your NCERT you'll find many examples because there is a similar table and you can write down many examples. There is example butterfly, rice plant, wheat plant, apple, various other organisms. I just wanted to give you an idea how in this case there are 2n and in this case there is just n in the gametes, right? From the diploid mother cell you come to haploid gamete cell. Well, some organisms produce absolutely similar looking gametes, means you won't be able to differentiate between the female gamete and the male gamete. Okay, for example, we have the cladophora, which produces similar gametes. So these gametes are known as isogametes, means similar looking. And you can take the example of humans or fucus, in which gametes are totally different. They look totally different from each other. One is big and one is small. And these are known as heterogametes. Well, these questions can be asked for 1 mark. Please write this down. So after the first event of the pre-fertilization event, which is the gametogenesis, The gamete transfer. Well, the gamete transfer can take place in plants by two processes. By the way, the process is known as pollination only, but there are two types of pollination, which are the self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination usually takes place in plants which are monoecious, whereas cross-pollination takes place in plants which are dioecious. I hope you all know what is pollination. It is the transfer of pollen from the anther of the flower to the stigma of the same flower in self-pollination and to a different flower in cross-pollination. Okay. So this was all in the gamete transfer. Now we come to the main process of the main event of the sexual reproduction, which is known as fertilization. Okay, so before I tell you what is fertilization, let me tell you there are few organisms in which fertilization doesn't take place at all, and the female gamete doesn't take place, and the female gamete itself develops into a new organism. This type is known as what you call parthenogenesis, where no fertilization takes place. Parthenogenesis. For the process of parthenogenesis, you can take the example of some lizards, rotifers, turkey is a bird, by the way, and honeybee. In these organisms, the female gamete itself develops into a new organism, so the fertilization doesn't take place at all, and thus this process is known as parthenogenesis. So now that we know where fertilization doesn't take place, let's talk about where fertilization does take place. So in the process of fertilization, there is a common term known as known as syngamy. It is the meeting of the male gamete with the female gamete. Well, as in humans, there is this egg with which the sperm fertilizes, and thus this leads to the formation of what we commonly call the zygote, right? A zygote is usually given a strong protective covering so that it doesn't get damaged, right? So this was all under fertilization. Fertilization is the most crucial event of sexual reproduction, not to forget, right? So after fertilization, we have the post-fertilization events. In post-fertilization, we first have the embryogenesis. Well, embryogenesis is nothing but the development of zygote into embryo only, which takes place by the division of zygote, by the cell division of zygote, right? So at 8 to 32 cell stage in humans, this zygote is known as embryo. So the development of zygote into embryo is known as embryogenesis. You can write this down. And in plants, the ovary develops into fruit. Okay, ovules develop into seed, and there is a pericarp, which is the covering of the fruit. The stamen, sepals and petals wither off. Wither off. Winter off, and the stigma does stay attached. There's this ovary that develops into fruit, the ovules into seed, and the seed, and there's this covering which is known as the pericarp, or in Hindi we call it the chilka of the fruit. So these are the various events that are under sexual reproduction. So this was all under reproduction in organisms. Thank you.